G'day folks, my name is Alan Murray and I'm the Vice President of Product Management for Novell System and Resource Management Business Unit. And in that business unit we're responsible for a wide array of products, but a lot of them focusing around virtualization. And I'd like to talk to you today a little bit about virtualization, what that means for next generation data centers, and kind of some unique problems I think that people encounter as they try to use virtualization to solve other problems with. So one of those things we refer to is this notion of data center defragmentation. And I'll get to what that actually means in a minute, but I want to give you a little bit of a background. If we look historically at the way data centers have been structured, they've really been very siloed, where we had a stack of hardware with an operating system and a software stack on top of that and some data either directly attached or sitting out somewhere in the storage fabric. But all of those systems were incredibly single and specific and special purpose. So that server over there I could point to inside my data center, and that thing runs my collaboration system, and that thing runs a departmental web server, and that one over there is where we store our financial services, and things of that nature. Now that's starting to shift because IT itself is starting to transform. And we're starting to get into a world now where business services and business service management is far more important than what that box over there in the corner does. So this is really this whole idea underlying things like ITIL and COBIT and data center transformations, leading them towards being service-oriented or business-oriented and finding out ways in which IT can articulate the value to the business. So, interesting notion. What's no longer running on that box over there doesn't matter, but a far more elaborate, cooperative, and fluid kind of IT infrastructure is what tends to move. And one of those things that's sort of a critical part in all of this has been virtualization, because it's allowed for it. So virtualization has broken down the barriers of this is what runs there and that's what runs there. We get the ability now to be a lot more fluid in our data centers and deploy services specifically where we need them, as we need them, in order to meet demand and make sure we're enforcing the service levels, right, on those particular services. Interesting problem that comes out of that is this whole notion that if I don't know where it is and it may move over there or back here or move to a different location, how do I track all of those things? How do I keep them secure? But most importantly, how do I make sure that I'm optimizing my resources? Now, if you look at how virtualization has been adopted to give this fluidity, it typically starts off as a one-time project. We're going to consolidate our data center. We're going to save money on power and cooling. We're going to save rack space, or we're going to save on power consumption, things of that nature. So a large study will be undertaken where we'll go out and we'll do reconnaissance and we'll see what workloads are good for virtualization, where we think we can put those and so on, and we shove them in a corner and we forget about them. But now virtualization adds a few more problems to that in the sense that things become spontaneous. It's hard to hook up a physical server and make it appear instantaneously, but a virtual server can appear instantaneously, and then it can disappear just as quickly as it reappeared. And so what tends to happen is if you look at that, all of the hardware capacity inside of a data center as a complete and total grid, or as a full total resource pool, we find out that we're not actually utilizing it particularly efficiently anymore. That we've got bits and pieces of services sitting inside of virtual machines that are hanging around all over the place. So this is where we've kind of hit upon this idea of data center defragmentation. And it really comes back to borrowing an old thought from the early days of PC computing, when every few weeks or every few months somebody says part of your good hygiene, what you need to do is go through and defragment that hard drive and make sure that the disk itself is being utilized appropriately, and you're going to get better access speeds, you're going to get better, longer life, and all that sort of thing. Well, the same thing is sort of true here. What we're not trying to do is extend the life or extend the lifespan of a data center, but we are trying to utilize the resources in it more effectively. So as VMs proliferate and move around all over that data center, we end up with this idea of sprawl, or VM sprawl, and it's something that folks have tried to deal with for as long as there's been virtualization. How do I get a handle on that? How do I control it? And so on. So our approach to that is very sort of similar. We'll borrow an old adage from carpentry. And carpenters have always said, measure twice, cut once. And that's sort of the first part of what people do with virtualization. We call that virtualization 1.0. Here's the right thing to move, and this is the place where I'm going to move it to. But then they walk away. Well, unfortunately, software, services, virtual machines, they're not really like wood. And they tend to grow, and they tend to morph, and they tend to shift over time. I suppose bad wood does that too, but hey, in this case we're going to assume that for the most part wood's pretty much constant. So what we have to do is re-optimize and continually evaluate the decisions we made and make sure if we're applying those resources correctly. So walking into a typical data center, there's one thing you can say is pretty much a universal truth. No service is perfectly provisioned. And it's either under-provisioned or it's over-provisioned. We're not applying the right amount of resource to it, typically. And if we are, at one particular point in time, applying exactly the right resource levels, well, we're not right now. So our adage is to take that carpentry adage, extend it a little bit, and say what's important is to measure twice, cut once, then measure again, and keep measuring, and keep optimizing and moving those resources, or as we call them, workloads, inside of the data center around to make sure that we're constantly meeting the right amount of demand. And we'll have the capability at that point then to smooth the demand curve inside of the data center to appropriately match the amount of resource that's being applied to any given workload or a collection of workloads in the appropriate period of time that they're needed. And then as demand rises or as demand shrinks, we can add additional capacity inside of the data center and sort of smooth that. So what problem is that really solving? Well, for one, you get better utilization of the workloads inside of the space to begin with. Two, you get better visibility into how hardware and capacity inside of the data center is being utilized and planned. You eliminate those undercapacity and overcapacity kind of problems and sort of smooth the curve. But there's a hidden side benefit to all of this too. Typically, if you look inside of a standard enterprise, it takes about 6 months to provision a project. And that starts from the time the project is conceived and requested till the time it's ultimately delivered inside the data center. And our goal is to be able to help customers solve this problem of how do I shrink that down? How do I make sure that when I want to provision a new service, I'm doing it more effectively? And by giving you that freedom to move the resources around, to continually optimize the way those resources are deployed inside of the data center, then what you get is that better utilization of the resource you've got, better visibility into the resources that you currently have, and can understand how to plan capacity an awful lot better. So instead of little pockets of over-provision, little pockets of under-provision, we constantly optimize or constantly defragment that data center and make sure we're applying the right level of resource to the right level of hardware at any particular point in time. Operations managers now get an unprecedented level of visibility. They can respond faster to the needs of the business. They can respond faster to the needs of operations. And they've got a better way for planning what their future capacity looks like because now there's good data and it's predictable data and we know how best to manage with what we have. In a lot of ways, sometimes we like to think of that data center as almost being a reverse Pez dispenser. So instead of popping servers off the top of that, what we're actually doing is pushing more workloads, and constantly re-optimizing those workloads onto the resources we have to give you best use and best visibility we possibly can.